welcome to Metaphysical Life Support. I'm your host, Naomi Eklund, and we are in the Coronavirus Bandwidth Wars Recording from Home series today. Sarah Denae is my first guest. I've been wanting to get her into the studio, and she graciously agreed to be the first person I interviewed as a Zoom guest. Let me tell you a little bit about Sarah. Sarah is a spiritual coach, and she guides her clients to the divine, helping them see and move through barriers and giving them tools for greater love and freedom in everyday life. As a designer and writer, Sarah sculpts images and words to powerfully communicate essential messages for her clients. Sarah has been a seeker and artist as long as she can remember. She currently lives in a veritable tree house with her teen daughter and son, their black, long-haired Chihuahua, and 13-year-old tuxedo cat. I wanted to say a little bit about Sarah before we jump in, and part of that is I met her at a workshop, and she was just one of those intriguing people. You don't meet that many people who seem genuinely interesting, and I found her genuinely interesting. So we started a conversation, and here we are today, like 3 years later, after many coffee dates, and have some great things to talk about. So Sarah, welcome today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's exciting. Now, Sarah and I are of the same mind because we've sat down and we've done the planning that you're supposed to do for these kinds of shows. And basically, we both said, we have so much to talk about. Let's jump in and see what's on our hearts and let that work. And I love it. Sarah and I agree on a lot of things, but we don't agree on everything, which is part of what makes it an interesting conversation. So Sarah, today is the end or the beginning of April 8th, and in 2020, and we're in the middle of the Corona thing. We've all been locked in our houses for going on a month. And I'd love to hear what's going on inside of you.
Oh man, it's so fascinating. Mostly I'm just like observing myself and observing my children and observing the world around me and just in awe of the shift that has happened, you know, all the shifts.
Tell me about the shifts that you see.
I mean, I think essentially what I'm seeing is a real return to what matters, right? Like, at least on the physical plane, you're seeing a return to sort of the basics of survival. I mean, people are in their homes, they have their shelter, you know, those who do.
They're lucky.
Some don't. And they're kind of, you know, the trips to the grocery store are these major events, which, you know, if you think about it, you know, 10,000 years ago, it was a major event to go out and get your food, you know.
It really was, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so, it's like we are all kind of like returning to almost like an instinctive way of living. Like, this is like what we got to do to survive, right? You know, avoiding that threat that's out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I don't know how it happens, but it seems like the people I talk to in my circles are all having some kind of sort of spiritual, I wouldn't say awakening, because a lot of it is like dark and hard and heavy, you know, which I think of course is required for the awakening. So we're all kind of like slipping into a new phase, I guess, of spiritual development. And I've been through several of those phases already, you know, like in the beginning, it was like I had these major epiphanies, one right after another, related to work and money. And I like made tremendous strides in terms of my mindset about these things. And then about a week ago, I fell, and I got really low, and I was like, oh God, what does this all mean? Like, you know, it started to become really real on a level that it wasn't before. And so again, I'm just observing myself and fascinated by the cycle, you know.
So my observation of you is that you are much more comfortable dealing with a wide range of emotions than many people are. And even those places that some might consider dark places or heavy places, those don't scare you off.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that I'm terrified in those places. But I also know that, I mean, maybe not every time in the moment, but I remember typically pretty quickly that it will pass and that it's necessary to go through it to get to the good stuff, you know, to get
So maybe what I should be saying is you're more willing.
willing.
Yeah, you're more willing to go into those tough emotions that a lot of us just avoid.
Yeah.
So for the audience, like, what are some suggestions that you could make? You just gave us one, which is remember that emotion is transitory.
Yeah.
So like what are some of your thoughts about processing in those places that might be helpful to people who this is new for?
Well, I like to use metaphor and vision, like, you know, visuals.
Right.
I really like to think of like the dark and the sadness and the pain and suffering and grief as like soil in which, you know, trees and flowers grow.
Right.
I like to think of it in terms of alchemy, you know, like we are within our bodies, within our hearts, within our whole being, we are transmuting all those negative emotions into something beautiful, you know. It's and uplifting and full of love and hope and joy, right? And you can so I think when you're in it, you just have to be in it. Like, it's about allowing oneself to be in it and to not resist it, right? The resistance creates more of the same. That's a lot easier said than done.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my interpretation, or sort of the words that I would use, and maybe, you know, sometimes framing things in multiple ways is helpful for people who take in information differently. I have often thought, well, first of all, one of the things we're grieving our old identity.
Yeah.
We're grieving the things that are familiar. We're grieving things that, like, well, my mom always made roast on Sunday, and we always had everybody over for Easter, which is coming up. And then there's a grief of that piece of your identity that has been built on that. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of kinds of grief. I mean, there's the obvious grief of the death of someone or something you love, but also there's the death of your identity. There's the death of your rituals. And I think that's one of the hardest parts in all of this is that death. And then you bring up this idea, you say soil. Having been a gardener, I think I agree, except the word I use is compost, because I kind of have this weird fascination with compost. But, you know, it's like, if you think about everything that held you in place being challenged, then it can become an opportunity to compost the parts of your identity that don't work.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah. So for you, are you willing to share some of the parts of your identity that maybe have been challenged here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in terms of sort of routine and the things I've taken for granted, which I think this is what we're all facing, those things that we've taken for granted now many of them are gone, just not on the table at all. I mean, I think when it really hit me that this was really real and it was rather devastating, and actually my daughter and I share this same moment because we used to have this ritual where every other week or so we would go to Powell's Books. For those of you who live in Portland, you know Powell's Books is a world famous bookstore that has this great cafe, and you can go and you can browse the shelves and you can pick out 5 books and take them to the cafe and sit there. And she and I would do that. And she would bring her iPad or her sketchbook, and she would draw people in the cafe, and I would read and I would write, and it was just like our mom-daughter ritual. And when we found out that PALS had closed down and that they potentially weren't going to open again, like my heart fell.
Yes.
Like I felt that was, for some reason, the worst.
Well,
and then,
honestly, you could feel the Portland collective heart breaking.
Yeah.
Because even if you only go to PALS once in a while, it's like knowing it's there is amazing. You have to know that it's there. It's part of the fiber of Portland.
Yeah. And so it's funny because, you know, I think that it was like a cumulative grief that hit me when I found that out, you know, like there's more to it. Right. And so since then, like, you know, just not being able to go and see my sister and not being able to go and see my mom and my dad. I mean, we made these plans where we're going to go and like sit 6 feet apart. And then now it's like 20 feet and some are saying 100 feet, you know,
wow.
And I'm like, well, how are we going to do 100 feet? We won't be able to hear each other. Like, and then I'm just like, screw it. It's not going to happen. And then I'm pissed. Like I'm angry. You know, I have this rage about it. And which is a very common emotion I think we're all feeling as well. Like, you know, this isn't fair. This is stupid. Like, why, you know, I could see how people are tempted into going out and disobeying the rules because like we can't touch each other anymore. We can't be in each other's presence in that way anymore. And it's really unnatural.
Yes, it is. It is. I think that you bring up a couple of really valuable things that we can all pay attention to, which is there are cathartic moments.
Yeah.
And we are very good at medicating ourselves, chocolate, coffee, TV, which in a future episode, maybe not today, but in a future episode, we'll talk about addiction because we both are personal friends of it. But we, you know, trancing out on Netflix and binge watching series. And then there's that moment. There's that moment when you can't hug your kid on their birthday, or when your favorite books, or you can't go and do these things. And we have to remember, or let me say that differently, because nobody has to do anything, but it's helpful to remember that when you check in with your emotional self, your psychological self on a regular, daily, or more basis, you have more of an opportunity to understand what's going on. And you may still have the cathartic events, but then you don't think it's all about that cathartic event, because we all have an emotional, psychological, energetic, spiritual buildup around these things. So that's a reminder of daily attention to our inner world is one of the best tools in the best of times or the worst of times.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I would like to add the sort of spiritual element to that, because in the end, you know, I believe that, you know, we have a will, we're humans, we have this consciousness that we're blessed with that's also kind of a curse, but, you know, it is what it is. And it's a beautiful thing. And ultimately, I believe that we are rather like vehicles. I mean, we can steer, we can, you know, change gears, but we are not driving ourselves. Like there's another energy out there. It is driving everything. It is the energy of life, of all of life in the whole universe. And when we surrender to that energy, which involves looking at one's emotions and tapping into them and feeling them more than anything, more than analysis, it's feeling them. We are surrendering to the truth that something else is ultimately driving us.
Sarah, we are at our time for our first segment. So we're going to take a quick pause, and I want to come back to a couple of points that we were talking about. So for you, the audience, stay tuned, because we're going to talk more about how do we check in on a daily basis and what are some of the reasons you might want to do that. We're also going to talk more about, I would like to talk more about grief because I think that people don't really understand grief and how it impacts us in all kinds of ways, and how it is the one inevitable emotion that we try so hard to avoid and don't understand. But also this last comment that Sarah made about the energy that is driving the universe. There's something bigger than us and our idea of free will. And how does that free will work inside of this energy that's bigger than us? Thank you so much. Stay tuned, or I should say like, click, and subscribe. Check out the next video. It'll be Sarah Denae 2. And I am so happy that you're here today with us. Thank you.